everyone. I am Angela Clutton. I'm the co-director of the British Library Food Season. Enormous welcome to our big weekend. This is the culmination, really, of the food season, which has been happening for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Over today and tomorrow, we have 14 events across 2 days, which is slightly mind-blowing and certainly sort of leg energy sapping. But we have so many great voices and speakers and subjects. And this is one which we are really excited about because it ties in with the major exhibition that's happening over in the main aspect of the library about gardening. And what we wanted to show in this session is how gardening can be used to feed us and feed and nurture us really in lots of different ways. So we have a fabulous panel on half the stage. I apologise. We're going to try very hard to sort of point heads to you guys that way. We've got a band on later on in the afternoon, so we're slightly shrunk. But we have a panel who I think are going to give us lots of different aspects of how they approach gardening and how they feel that as societally we can think about gardening to feed ourselves. We're going to be here for an hour. There will be questions at the end within that hour, so if you have things you'd like to ask, you'll definitely get the chance. And then afterwards, these guys will be selling and signing books in the bookstore, which is out on the piazza, so don't miss that. We are chaired by Jenny Linford, so I'm going to introduce Jenny and then hand over. Jenny has written slightly staggeringly 20 cookbooks, which I just find I know. That definitely deserves a round of applause. 20 cookbooks. And the last couple, well, within the last few, are 2 with Kew Gardens, which I think puts Jenny in a lovely position to lead us through discussion and in her broader work across all her cookbooks. I always think of Jenny as being one of those people who's not only held in huge affection and esteem within the food community, but whose aspect on food is very much about thinking of the larger perspective within our society. So I think Jenny's going to steer us through this lovely conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Over to you guys.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you everyone for coming. So actually, I'm going to take the easy way out and ask my panel to introduce themselves, because I think that makes, rather than me trying to describe what they do, they can tell me what they do. I'm going to start with you, Leyla, go down the line.
Okay, sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out and sitting in this quiet, dark room on a very sunny day to listen to us. My name's Leyla Kazim. I'm a TV and radio presenter. I'm a presenter on BBC Radio 4's The Food Programme. If anyone watches MasterChef, you might recognise me from that. This year, me and my husband are changing our lives in ways we never imagined, in that we are quitting the only life we've ever known, which is an urban one in London, and we are relocating to a 3-acre site in the countryside in rural Portugal in order to live off the land. And I've written a book about this called Pathways, and it's a 2-part special, limited edition, and it's an honest look at the absurdities of modern life and a lot of the systems that don't work, the food system being one of them, and it chronicles a decision that we have made that has led us to pursuing this land-based way of living, which has always been a dream of ours. Yes, that's my intro.
That's quite an intro. Good, yes. Claire, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Claire Ratinon. I'm a food grower and a writer. Gosh, I mean, there's so many things I could possibly say. But I write the gardening, the food aspect of the gardening column in The Guardian. I share it with somebody who writes about flowers. When people call me a gardener, I always have to push back and say I'm actually a food grower, because so that people don't ask me about their hedges. And I've got no idea. I mean, you can eat a rose, so I kind of know what to do. So yeah, basically I'm only really interested in plants that I can put in my mouth. So I used to work I was just sharing, I used to work in the media, but about just over a decade ago, found my way to the world of plants and have been doing everything I possibly can to get closer to the land. More recently though, in the last couple of years, I've been part of establishing a trade union for land workers, because we are, as a sector, very under-unionised and very, very exploited. And so a lot of my energy at the moment is going into workers' rights work. So, yeah, this very much shapes my perspective.
And you have a book out?
I do have a book. I have a number of books. I have got 2 books, actually, but the one that's probably most pertinent is called Unearthed, No Relationship, actually, no relation to the exhibition whatsoever, which is a memoir which talks about, my journey from moving away from a media-focused life to a land land worker focused life. And yeah, it has lots of different strands in it. It talks about the country of my origin, our origin actually, Mauritius. So one of the strands talks about the history of Mauritius and talks about colonial legacies when it comes to land and plants. And yeah, is an exploration of both the kind of moving towards a relationship with the natural world, but also the troublesome aspects of how difficult that can be for somebody who grew up in a country but have heritage elsewhere.
I cannot wait to read it.
Fantastic. Kathy.
Hello everyone, I'm Kathy Slack. I'm a food writer and veg grower. Like Claire, don't ask me about your shrubbery. I do not understand it, but if I can cook with it, I'm interested. I used to work in advertising and had the textbook rat race meltdown about a decade ago, and found comfort and solace, in fact, kind of therapy and a whole new way of seeing the world in the veg patch. And my latest book, Rough Patch, is about how the garden brought me back to life and life lessons I learned in the veg patch, along with some recipes, which is mostly what I do, is recipes inspired by my little backyard patch in Oxfordshire. I write for Delicious magazine and BBC Gardener's World and Fortnum & Mason's and other bits and bobs around the place. So on a Substack as well. I think most of it, you're Substacking as well, aren't you? So we'll see you there.
Pam. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Pam Warhurst, and 17 years ago, I, with friends, found something called Incredible Edible, which was motivated by the fact that we were coming into a climate crisis, and most of the problems that were ahead of us were going to be experienced most by those people who didn't know how to grow, how to cook, how to nurture their communities in a way that was kind to the planet. So because of that complete absence of other people not realising that this was a big ticket issue, we just made up Incredible Edible. We made up a simple model that says you can grow food in public places, in the place you call home. You don't have to ask permission, just do it. That through that process you will upskill, you will find people who know how to pickle and bottle and so on and so forth, because I am not a grower. I have learned a lot in 17 years, I can tell you, by trial and error, but I'm a cook. And I'm pretty passionate about getting more people relating to what they can grow, but how they can actually turn that into nutritious food. And at the moment I'm campaigning for a right to grow and improve your own environment on the land you pay your taxes for. I'm campaigning for repurposing public realm in this country in order that everybody has a chance in difficult times to nurture themselves, their community and their planet. That's what
Fantastic. Right, well, inspiring. Yes. I mean, we've got a lot of things to talk about. And one of the things we're starting off with is I wanted to explore this idea that gardening is good for mental health. And I was thinking, as a child, I had quite a nomadic childhood living in flats. But the idea that gardening was good for you came from a very wonderful book, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which I think is a very profound book in that Mary, the central character, who's this troubled, lonely, very cross and quite obnoxious girl, she discovers gardening, and through that act of I suppose in a way of learning to care for the plants in that garden, that secret garden that she finds, it's her own space, and she realises she sort of just naturally starts to look after it. And there was a flowering. It's a very beautiful story. What do you think of? I wanted you to get your insights on why you think gardening is. And people often say gardening is good for mental health. Like why? But Kathy, tell us, because you've also had a very personal experience of this. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, for me, I would be specific about growing food being good for mental health. I mean, I feel like we all know that nature, getting out in nature is good for you and good for the soul and reconnects you with the cosmos and everything. But I think growing food has a different role and quite a specific role, which is that it gives you agency. Mm-hmm. And when I was eventually signed off work with depression, and I was in a state where I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know how to start the car. The car keys were taken off me. I was not left alone. I couldn't get out of bed. And once I finally realised that this radish that I'd randomly thrown into the soil, more of which later, turned into a radish, apart from the wonder of seeing a tiny little seed turn into something, wonder is a very powerful therapy, or it was for me anyway, that sense of awe, but also, I've just made my lunch. I don't know what day it is, I can't make tea, but I've just made my lunch. Yes. And there's something about that sense of agency, taking back just a little bit of control. You don't need to be self-sufficient. Taking just a bit of control back that I found enormously powerful.
Claire, what are your thoughts about it?
I suppose, in my book, I do talk quite extensively about mental health, but partly, maybe not explicitly using that term, but because I talk about belonging and I talk about what it means to have a relationship to a piece of land, and especially when a sense of being in a certain country, this one obviously, is a troubled one, and that for me at least, being able to cultivate a relationship with the land has, and also a real sense of oneself as part of an ecosystem, was a way of reweaving myself into an understanding of belonging that was not, hung on nationhood or identity or something that could be taken away from me or troubled by someone else. There was this sense of unquestioned belonging when you really see yourself as not only in relationship to the natural world, but participating in it. And the growing practice that I was then, discovering for the first time is something that really made that visceral for me. I think the thing I would say additionally, though, is that I think we always need to be a bit cautious about using, being overly flowery about the idea of gardening for mental health as though it's an intervention in and of itself, And I think, the conditions that create poor mental health are so often socioeconomic, right? And so the idea that gardening in and of itself is the thing, it's certainly really, really important. And I think for me, it's been very transformative. But I think that it's just really careful to be not flippant about what it really takes for someone to have good mental health, and so often that is having what they need. I need a relationship with the natural world, but my immediate needs are not that. No, and so.
Leyla, what are your thoughts?
Yes, well, I've always said I am not happier than at the end of a day where I've been outside under the sun and I'm covered in mud after a hard day's graft doing gardening. And for me, I think some of it is there's a mental liberation when you know you don't really have control. And you can't control nature, right? You have to go by the weather, the seasons, which fox has come in and decided to dig everything up. And for me, because I'm quite a control freak in all other aspects of my life. And so when I'm gardening, it's almost like I'm here to sort of guide seeds into a bit of soil here and do that. But really, it's out of my hands. And that is I find that so freeing. And it also really helps me to accept failures, because I would say 70% of what I grow is a failure. Things don't work.
Yeah.
And if you think about that in any other aspect of life, you think, oh, it didn't work, I failed, this wasn't a success. But when it comes to gardening, I'm like, it's part of it. Yeah. I'm so okay that this crop absolutely tanked because it really wasn't down to me. I was just there guiding it, but it's nature. And so, I just find it incredibly freeing to garden, mentally, out of my hands.
You did just describe why every farmer I've ever worked for is deeply unhinged. Having business model arranged around that truth is whew.
I can imagine.
What are your thoughts about? What would you say?
I think there's more evidence for the benefits for mental health and well-being being written about than you can shake a stick at, which is why it's totally amazing that more people that have influence on policy and the like don't take it more seriously as a real way forward to bring us together. What I would say, however, is that what I've noticed by working with people, and we've done an awful lot in the north of England, and they tend to be in quite dense urban settlements where people get interested in a right to grow. Some of the conversations are around, well, you know, I've been really worried about the climate and I didn't know what was happening and I didn't know where to start. But you know, I've read about this incredible edible thing, or I've read about social farms and gardens or whatever. There's a lot of good people out there. And I've just started doing it in my window box. You know, and actually, I've got some purpose now. I may not be able to change the world. I may not be the leader of a country, but what I can do is grow what I want to do in a sunny corner and learn from it. And I've also seen that when groups go out, and it's all volunteers, on a Sunday, you know, repurposing their public realm, whether it's in front of the police station or the college or a grass verge or whatever, they talk to each other. Mm-hmm. They become part, they reconnect in their community in a way that only food can do.
Right.
In my view. Mm-hmm. In a way that helps them not worry about whether they can do, because everybody can do something. They can do a poster, or they can dig a patch, or they can collect seeds and put, it doesn't matter. Food brings people together, it gives people a sense of purpose, and that element in their life may well be missing, and it's a significant contributor to how they feel about themselves and their well-being. So it's amazing. I'm just gobsmacked that people choose to use volunteers all the time and not put some serious investment into people's ability to nurture themselves in the place they call home.
Yeah. Interesting. In fact, that leads me on, Pam, to the next. I want to talk about the idea of community garden. The British Library has got a very good exhibition on called Unearthed, which this event is sort of linked to. And one of the strands in the exhibition, one of the ideas in it, is the power of community and how gardens can create community, or gardening can create community. Which, so, Pam, tell us a bit more about what you've seen through your work with Incredible Edible.
Well, absolutely, and as I say, Incredible Edible is one aspect of it. There are so many brilliant organisations, you know, across London, Capital Growth, and what was achieved in 2012. There's some fantastic examples. But what I would say is so when we have so many problems, from loneliness through to lack of self-belief, through to grey urban deserts of concrete, when we've got all these things, and we know that by giving people an opportunity to turn the grey into green, to reconnect with each other, and then to share that food at the end of the community experience by cooking together, because the one sure way to help people really connect is to share food around the table. And that's been my experience. It's incredibly simple. It's incredibly cheap to do. It just needs to be encouraged more, because the joy that you get in from people who are sort of 85 or whatever, who on the whole aren't out there with their boots doing the digging, but they may be the best tomato growers you've ever come across. Some of the best potato growers I ever know were in Wigan once they'd come up from the mines. You know, there are some amazing examples in the community of real leadership around food. And it would be great to be able to celebrate them more.
Kathy, what are your thoughts about, you know, in fact, that goes back to what you said about growing food plants and how important that was for you.
Well, I feel a bit bad about answering this question because it exposes me as a massive princess and an only child. Because when I first started gardening, and the joy of living in the Cotswolds is that it's full of hobby farmers who have more land that they know what they want to do with. And when you say you've started thinking about growing vegetables, they go, oh, I've got a kitchen garden that I'm not using. Would you like it? Thank you very much, which is what happened to me. It was ridiculous. And I found, I'm afraid, that the solitary nature of gardening of growing my food was really important to me at the beginning. And I felt like it was an escape, this little patch of mine where it was just me and the earth. And I came to realise that it actually wasn't an escape, it was reality. It was everything else that wasn't reality that I was getting away from. But once I'd got harvests and I was sort of trundling them home in my rickety old trolley, and the villagers start to come out. It sounds like the Archers, it's ridiculous. People would sort of pop their head out and go, ooh, nice courgettes, Kathy. And like, would you like some? And given that, given that at the time I could hardly string a sentence together, that, like you say, food brings people together, whether you want it to or not, and everyone's got an opinion, and that started to help me talk to people a bit more. So I'm still quite introverted about my growing. I do have an allotment now, but it's a very quiet allotment. I can't talk to other people when I go. So I'm sorry.
That's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. So, Claire, what are your thoughts about the community? I don't know, have you seen it yourself in your work?
I mean, obviously, most of my work has been kind of growing for market and working on farms, which can be very solitary. But I have worked in community spaces, and I mean, they've been such fascinating spaces because they're really complicated, actually, especially if they've been there for a long time. And you know, I suppose that's something that I think is really valuable as well, is like figuring out how to be in those spaces with people who have like competing desires about how, you know, competing ambitions or a sense of ownership when they also have to share. And yeah, so I mean, my experience of the community gardens is definitely not a kind of joyful, always harmonious relationship. Because I think, you know, when people come into a space and you know, it's a great thing that people feel a sense of like ownership, or at least ownership of the space as a community, but that will inevitably come with conflict and clashes and difficulties, and people who feel like they're not being heard, but that's an important thing to negotiate, and I think it's a really important way of modelling the possibilities of how we can engage with land and own land communally, and I think, you know, we could do with more communalism. Yes. And so it's a good but not untroubled place in my experience. Anyway, I didn't last very long.
Yeah,
I was just thinking. I did an episode of the Food Programme about 3 years ago about urban growing, and I visited a rooftop garden in Stockport, and they had transformed the top of a car park into this amazing garden, and they had to get up to the roof, quite, you know, heavy things for the beds and IBC tanks to collect water, and they had to check that the roof could hold all of this. But it was unbelievable because it was a like 6-floor car park in this grey area, and you went to the roof and you were like, oh my God, and it was a community garden. And it was a magic place, basically. I remember interviewing them and speaking to some of the volunteers who the community who garden there. And I was like, oh my God, this is so special.
Yeah.
Imagine how many freaking grey rooftops there are in cities. And if we greened all of that up, how much extra food would be producing locally? How much would be engaging locals? I was just blown away. And the other thing I want to mention is there's a community farm, Sutton Community Farm. Yeah, I'm in their catchment area for vegetable delivery, so that's where I get my vegetables from. And it's really amazing because they invite people onto the farm. They do a wassail. A wassail it's like January time.
Yeah.
Where you sort of do songs and things to sort of encourage the earth to grow. To be fruitful. To be fruitful for the upcoming season. But they bring the community in, and I remember I went to it, and so you see the people who work on the farm, like, these are the people who are growing my food, and you see the customers. So it's a business in that, you know, but it's a community farm. And actually what's interesting is they're actually struggling, and they've had to twice do massive crowd funds to try and stay afloat. And it's just interesting because they did get like the community to rally around and give money, but they had to do it again. So you're right in that they're not. It's hard.
It's really hard. Yeah. I mean, that's a food system issue as well.
Yes.
It's funny you should mention like growing on a rooftop, because my whole journey began because I was living in New York and totally by chance found my way to a rooftop farm which is called Brooklyn Grange, and it still exists. The site that I found, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore, but it was on the 8th story of the General Motors building in Queens, and it is just over an acre, and it was it was the most productive land I've ever seen. It was remarkable, and I genuinely, I saw a poster at the bottom that said, "Come and visit this rooftop farm," which sounded totally implausible, and went up, and it was literally the day my life changed. Like, I had a moment where I was like, wow, I'm so obsessed with food. I'm living in a city that is obsessed with food, food and I have no idea how it's produced. And so like from then on, turned up every week trying to just find out how it worked. And yeah, exactly the same way, they had to use kind of big cranes to like haul the compost up and figure out, do all of the kind of structural surveying in order to make sure that they could actually hold all of that earth and all of the, because it has a sort of membrane, a load of earth and compost, and then all of the plants and all the people. So it's quite an operation. And sadly, we don't have as many flat roofs in this country because we have a lot of pitch roofs because of the rain. So people are like, could we do this here? And I'm like, probably not. But we could try, because car parks are a great possibility, but we have a lot of pitched roofs, unfortunately.
But that's interesting, because there are more ways than just with soil, aren't there, to produce the food that we actually need sustainably. And besides the public realm that we've got, which one of these things, which is not a robust statistic, but it's one that's produced by a university, so I roll it out every 5 minutes. We could theoretically, in England, produce 40% of our fruit and veg from the public realm we've got. If we didn't do that, because half of it's soccer or whatever, can you imagine if we did 20%? It's phenomenal if we want to take climate change seriously. But the stuff that I've done has been marginalised because people have still got an attitude in this country that people who produce food commercially are in some way there because they can't do anything else. As opposed to being the absolute heroes of the hour.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and will be increasingly so, which is why it amazes me that we don't think about teaching the importance of food, how to produce it, how to process it in STEAM in schools. Science, technology, engineering, art and maths, all those are needed if we're going to produce the buildings of the future that can grow on the top, that can harvest up the side, that know how to water it and so on and so on. This is a really big ticket issue for people who may not think gardening's for them. And if we could just normalise it more and have it in the conversation in the heart of our communities more, then we might be able to bring on that next generation of urban growers a lot faster than the current system was.
As somebody who has been a school gardener and didn't last that long, it's incredibly difficult to try and get schools to take it seriously, even if they know that it's valuable. Because I was brought into a space because there was a sense that like this could be really valuable. There was a piece of land, some planters that had been like left to disrepair, and it was so peripheral to the, even though there's so much you can teach through the act of growing, you can literally do maths and obviously biology. There's ways in which you can embed the curriculum into growing, but it was seen as like valuable but peripheral. And so it was always treated actually as a kind of extended playtime, and it made it really hard
After
to do
school
anything
or
meaningful.
lunchtime, I know.
Well, I met each class once a term. What can you do if you meet a child and they seem engaged and you don't see them until the next term, and the thing that they did feels totally disconnected to what the garden then eventually produces? I was so incredibly frustrated by it. It was really hard. So yeah, I'm really, really with you on the idea of embedding it into the curriculum.
I'm going to move on, because we've got lots of ground to cover. And so it's another strand in Unearth the exhibition, which is very striking, is the sort of importance of growing for diaspora communities and how it allows, and that's something that's very close to my own heart, because the first book I ever wrote was about multicultural food shops in London, as somebody of Singaporean English heritage pining for things that were very exotic at the time, like lemongrass, and having to find the shops to go. But I could have gone one further and thought I could have grown it, but that didn't cross my mind. But, well, Claire, tell us, what are your thoughts? I mean, this is something close to your heart, I imagine, that you've seen and I mean, do you think it's true that there is this power to be able to grow the food that you want to grow, that that's the flavours that you miss from your part of your heritage that you don't have access to?
Absolutely. The backbone of my book, Unearthed, is about me moving out of London and moving into my first place that I could actually grow in with agency. Everything I'd done up until that point, I was always growing on land that belonged to someone else, or was or somebody else had the kind of the control over the kind of vision of it. So I was never ever growing the plants that I wished to. And so moving to the countryside, I suddenly had this very modest plot, but there I was able to, for the first time, grow the food that raised me, that raised my family, and such a and such an important part. I mean, I would honestly say that the Mauritian cucumber is like a kind of key character in my book.
I was going to ask
to the extent, well, like, there's like a number of different things, but this was, you know, these were seeds that my dad had given me. He got my aunt to send them, which I don't think you're allowed to do. But there you go. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what you can like sneak into a suitcase if you're from any diasporic community, you know. And so these cucumber seeds sort of arrived with me, and it was a couple of years before I actually left London. And I tried to grow them in different places. I tried to grow them in a space that I was stewarding when I was in London, and then I worked on had a horrific experience working on a farm in Wiltshire. I tried to grow them there, and they wouldn't germinate. And then it was only when I moved to this space that I actually got them to grow for the first time, and this was during the pandemic, and so I couldn't actually see my dad because they live about an hour and a half away, and so we couldn't actually visit them. So what we ended up doing was my partner's an artist. We would wrap them as if they were artworks into like wrap them in like beautiful paper, and then but at least the first one and then in a box and sent them by the post. And I think, you know, much like what you were saying, I think it has been quite baffling to my parents. I mean, it helped when I wrote a book, but it was very baffling for my parents for me to move from a media career and then go to something as humble and so undervalued as land work. And I think there was a real moment of like deep understanding and deep connection when I was able to show them how powerful it was that I was able to grow the food that they love in the land that they had, you know, moved and called their home. And so I think there's something really deeply important about carving out those spaces where diasporic communities can have the food that is so intertwined with their identities and their sense of self as part of a heritage, as part of a family, or a part of a nation even. It's something that I think is in a remarkably powerful thing, and I think it really was a real kind of coming home for me and understanding and being able to show my parents who it was really important to me that they understood why I cared so much about it, to present them with those vegetables.
I have to ask you, what did you do differently that made the cucumber germinate?
I think I was just like
the seeds just knew that.
I really do. I really think so. I mean, it sounds so. Oh my God, it sounds so woolly, doesn't it? A little woo. But I mean, when I think about the place in London, like I didn't have the. I had to cycle quite far to get to my patch. I couldn't really take care of it. I certainly couldn't grow it in my flat. I had nowhere to go. And then when I was in Wiltshire, I was just having such a horrible time, and it was just. I think that land was really angry, and it was really abused, honestly. And I just don't think it wanted to grow there. And then but by the time I got to East Sussex, I was able to just take care of it. And then also it was the pandemic. It was a wicked spring. Do you remember? The weather was amazing. The weather was amazing, and I was like relentlessly with my plants because all of my work had just evaporated. So it was just like me and the seedlings.
Living
so
off
it really
Leyla,
had my undivided attention.
Are there foods that you've enjoyed growing that are part of your heritage?
Do you know what? Actually, I don't think I've grown because my mother is from Mauritius. My dad is from Cyprus. He's Turkish Cypriot. And I would say I'm closer to my dad's side of the family. I have more connection to the Turkish side.
I'll get you on Mauritian cucumbers.
Yeah, please. I'm like, Mauritian cucumbers, I don't know what this is.
Oh, shit.
So my mum makes great Mauritian food, but maybe she's just sort of adapted to the British.
My parents do.
Yeah, to UK.
I've been here a long time.
Produce, yeah. But because basically my dad's from the Mediterranean, those kinds of crops are really easy to grow anyway. Kind of tomatoes, well, I say easy, it depends on the summer. But it's so that the point of like when you've migrated to a different country, whether it's you've been forcibly displaced or out of choice. Like my dad arrived in the UK as a refugee from the Civil War in Cyprus. Yeah. Of course, the first thing you're trying to find is food that reminds you of home, food that you recognise, which is why, you know, the Turkish supermarkets of North London, it's where everyone would go to get certain things such as molokhia, which is a kind of mallow leaf, which you make this Cypriot dish from. And it's so important. And even today, my dad prefers to shop at the local TFC, Turkish Food.
Oh, yes.
Turkish Food
Centre.
Centre, that's it. Turkish Food Centre, rather than going to Sainsbury's or something, because they will have things in season that reminds you. And you know, a loquat.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Nextly, yeah.
which in Portuguese is called a nespera.
Yes, it's very confusing.
And I had never eaten one prior to last April. I was working on some Portuguese farms to check I did actually want this life. And they were like, try one of these. They didn't know what the English name was. They said, it's a nespera. I was like, I don't know what this is. I'd never had a local. And I tasted it and I was like, holy shit. Talk about new favourite fruit alert. But when I showed my dad, he was like, he said, oh, these are, and he said the Turkish name, I can't remember. And I said, he goes, yeah, I get them in TFC because I can't ever find them anywhere else. And it reminds me of home. And I was like, oh, man.
It's the power to food. I mean, that's what you were saying, Pam. Is that something in your community work? Is that a strand that, are people growing things that they are nostalgic for or interested or?
Well, sure. I mean, absolutely. And we've so much to learn from each other, haven't we? I mean, it seems to me that as we grow our food alongside people from whatever culture in any part of the world, it teaches us a number of things around seasonality, because we've kind of like lost touch with that, and you made reference to that. It teaches us about, in difficult times with changing climates, how can we have a conversation where we might want to introduce new seeds into our ground because the things it's getting drier, it's getting wetter, or whatever it might be. And that community conversation around what can grow and what to have a go at, and to know that someone somewhere has got a history of being able to grow that and you can learn from them, is what unites a community under crisis, I think. So, and for me, going back to that, once again, because food allows you to work across age, income, culture and ability, it's a leveller, isn't it? So that one can be surprised and one can be humble enough to want to learn from others that can do things that you can't do. Grow things that you don't know about.
Yes. We need to talk about, because, you know, you have mentioned the climate crisis a lot, and this is the reality that we're facing. And as gardeners, you know, I think when you try and interact with us, and you realise, you know, I can see that everything's out very early in my own garden, much earlier. I'm guessing
So
you've all
early,
seen that.
yeah.
And with the changes, you know, we've had that. My family live in Italy, and it's been a very bleak, long, cold, unusually wet spring. So I went to see them. The lovely man who digs the vegetable plot, he was saying, oh, it's been a really bad spring, Jenny. You know, this is climate change reality, and one of the things that's going to hit us all is that the food crops we depend on, you know, if the weather doesn't work for us, it's not good. And I do a lot of work, as Angela mentioned, with Kew Gardens, and it's very interesting. They've got a kitchen gardener there, and the kitchen gardener is called Helena Dove. And so when you look at the kitchen garden, it just looks like a kitchen garden. But actually, when you go around and look at what she's growing, it's really fascinating, because what she says is that my role is to educate and show people. So she keeps all her failures, which, you know, as you know, is literally part of gardening, is that things don't always work. So, you know, tomatoes will get blight. She leaves them there to show that even at Kew, you know, they get blight, you know. But she also grows all these crops because she's in the quest of resilience. And she was saying that seed companies are, because of climate change, you're not able to grow things in Britain that you weren't able to grow before, you know, because like, whenever it's a bit warmer, it's a bit drier. And she's on this quest to find all these crops that will allow us to keep eating. Really important. Is that something you've come across?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, my plans for this site in Portugal is really to create a biodiverse, climate resilient sort of perennial food forest. So I'm going to focus on perennials, actually. One of the points I was going to say, perennial edibles, because of the roots going further down, deep into the soil horizon, they're accessing more nutrients, for one, because they're going deeper down. And they're also more resilient to drought or to flood, because they're just more kind of anchored. So I would say, I don't know, like home growers at home as well. For example, you know, you can grow kale, or you can grow perennial kale. I don't know if you've ever grown perennial. And so that's my tip if anyone wanted to take it home. But there is a book called Edible. Have you guys read it? I can't remember the authors. Edible, it's got like an orange. Oh, it's so great.
Oh, it's the like a Thames and Hudson.
The orange book.
It's like very beautiful.
It's
I know
very
exactly
beautiful
what it is.
illustration.
Oh.
It's called Edible. I highly recommend it.
It's like it looks like a cookbook.
Yes, it's a big,
and the subheading is.
I have seen it. It's really
it's really good.
It's edible crops for the future.
Yeah. It's really great.
And they, with beautiful illustrations, they describe these trees and perennials and bushes from around the world things that can grow in saline water, things that can resist fire, things that can create these amazing plants that could actually be scaled up to actually feed people. So I've taken this book, I've got 100 post-it notes in it, and I'm like, these are the plants I would really like to try and bring onto the land to create, to use crops that aren't already in Portugal, just to create this resilience. And it's about biodiversity. So when you don't have a monocrop and when you have lots of different species, if blight comes in, it's not going to decimate your entire
That's what Helena was saying. She's saying she doesn't grow a lot of one thing. She has lots of different things because, something will go, the badgers will come and dig something up, but they'll leave that. It was very interesting. But
and it's
Claire,
about...
what are your thoughts?
Go on.
Sorry. Additionally, it is the thing that also is really important and valuable about perennials is just the lower inputs. Once they're established, you're not desperately watering them all the time and feeding them all the time. Obviously an annual mulch, obviously always good for everybody. But yeah, and I think that's the thing that's so key, and also thinking like in terms of thinking about the labour of it as well is really is a really powerful part of perennial growing. I've actually forgotten the question.
We were just looking at resilience. I'm just interested in
Resilience, of course. It's tough. Most of my work has always been growing in more commercial settings, and so it's really hard to grow something that does incredibly one year and then to almost build a market around that or build a relationship with a restaurant or a wholesaler around that, and that to shift to the next year. And that is really, really challenging. And I think the key is going to be figuring out what crops will be able to weather those storms, what will sustain, what will thrive, and also what to stop trying with, honestly. And that's kind of heartbreaking, actually, because there's definitely things that I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there's definitely things that at the farm that I'm not currently working at, but I have worked at for the last few years, where we're having to divert our energy and just be like, oh, that's something that a lot of people expect, but actually it's not a great grower for us anymore, and actually we're going to have to just change tack. And I think in terms of what we can do on a kind of small scale, I think looking at saving seeds and actually understanding what that skill is, and being really intentional about saving seeds from plants that show themselves to be thriving in our particular ecosystem, and therefore effectively doing the kind of work of plant breeding, really, is a really amazing skill that I would really encourage anybody who doesn't know how to do it to learn how to do.
What are you doing, Pam? Because obviously you're so aware of the climate crisis. Is that something in Incredible Edible? Are you trying different crops? Are you experimenting to see what will work?
I'm kind of people-focused. So once we get onto the techie bits about what type of soil to grow, what type of thing, you can just write me off, right? Because I'm useless. After 17 years, I don't kill everything, but I'm not an expert. But the bottom line is that when you actually bring things back to more local level, somebody in your community knows how to do that.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Right.
So I do my bit.
Yeah.
They do their bit. We all gather around what seeds they want us to collect or whatever it might be, and somebody else then makes some nice little packets. And food and gardening involves so many skills and brings back decision-making to a human level. And that has kind of, seems to me, we've cut that thread with food.
Yeah.
And therefore we need to find ways of re-establishing that knowledge base, but also that sense of I've got something to do with it, and I have pride in that. So it doesn't worry me unduly that I'm not an expert in any of those things. I know what I know, and I know somebody else who'll know what I don't know.
Well, let's see. Yes, community living. Kathy, your thoughts on resilience? Is that something in your, are you aware that you've seen things not working because the weather's so odd?
I certainly notice unpredictability being greater than it was when I first started growing, which, considering I still don't particularly know what I'm doing, but I really didn't know what I was doing when I started, but you could get away with it a bit more than I feel like now. And in a way, I don't know if that's because things are changing in my little bit of the Cotswolds climate, or if it's that because I feel so much more connected with the seasons and the land and what's growing, that I see it more often. So the elderflower is out 2, maybe 3 weeks earlier than it was last year. It's extraordinary. The wild cherries, like the wild plums, cherry plums, which there weren't any of at all last year, are abundant this year. And normally I wait until, for example, after Chelsea to plant stuff out that's tender, but I did it maybe 10 days ago now, which I would never normally have done. And so it's that sort of...
So it's adapting in a way, isn't it?
Adapting and flexibility. And in a way it makes you... I like that I feel so aware of it and connected because I'm seeing these differences, but then they're not happy differences, if that makes sense.
In fact, we're going to open up to questions soon, but I had someone I wanted to ask people, because I've got friends who are very daunted by gardening, you know, because we've been sitting, Claire, you've pointed out the tricky bits of it, but we have been very positive about gardening. But it is, you know, people do find it daunting, and I wondered if you wanted to share, you know, some encouraging advice. You know, let's start with Pam. I know you said you're not a gardener, but what
I'm
what
your
would you say
poster child for that.
what would you say to somebody who doesn't, you know, why would someone want to garden? Because you must, you know, you have to persuade people to garden. What would you say to them?
Well, if there's any inclination whatsoever to have a concern around something, then I would say start small. Just the only way that I know to succeed in gardening, and I've learned the hard way over 17 years, is do what's possible, find success in it, celebrate it, and then move on the next year. You know, so if you want to start with a window box, start with a window box. Don't start with the biggest allotment you've ever seen and then beat yourself up because you've not managed to. No. So for me, most people, when they start and have a success, are pretty passionate. Either because they're growing it or they're putting it into some food or whatever it might be. So as long as you start at a scale where you can guarantee a level of positive feedback, then you'll start to build an interest in it from there.
I've had very disheartening experiences with slugs every time I try and grow. So I'm just growing very expensive slug food, basically. So, Kathy, what would you... is there a crop or something, you know, something you think that's a great one to start with?
Well, definitely, and I would agree that start small. I spoke to somebody once who said, after a talk like this, and they said, I tried gardening and I'm growing vegetables, and I tried it once and it didn't work. I was like, what did you start with? And I went, well, I started with a cauliflower. I was like, what? Hey, why a cauliflower? I mean, I love a cauliflower, but if you can grow a cauliflower, you deserve a bloody medal. They're a sod to grow. So don't start with a cauliflower. I'd say choose 2 or 3 veggies that you actually really eat and you really like. And I think like radishes is sort of my gateway drug to getting people into vegetables, because you only need a windowsill, a window box. They grow, or a small patch of land. They grow really easily, perhaps not in this dry, wet, but apart from that, they grow really quickly and they're amazing. And to see it go from that to a golf ball in 4 or 5 weeks with a good wind, I think that's how you get people addicted. And then there are more.
What about you, Claire? What would you...
It's funny you should say, like, your cauliflower story really makes me laugh, because like, I know a lot of people started growing in lockdown. And so I can imagine I got a lot of messages from people who were just like, I've done this thing, and then like had absolutely jumped the gun. And I had a friend who had sown like a kind of tray of cauliflowers. I mean, didn't even have a garden. And so I was like, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do? Like, even if you put one in a very big bag, it would probably really struggle. We just had like 70 seedlings. I was just like, I don't know, dude, you should have probably texted me before you did this. But, so yeah, I mean, enthusiasm is banging, but like being a little bit more intentional is probably a little bit more useful. And I feel like I'm going to step on the toes of what I imagine your answer would be. And if I was, whenever I'm encouraging anybody to start, I encourage them to grow something they can eat regardless, as in is edible from germination. So anything leafy, anything in the salad world, like anything, pretty much all brassicas, you can grow them as microgreens. Peas are also great, like shoots. And then if you get them to maturity, congratulations. But if you realise that they're leggy and they're going a bit, you can snip them and eat them and start again. And so I would say that like anything that doesn't, anything that is right even when it's wrong, that's where you want to go.
Leyla, what are your you know, what encouraging you to give gardeners?
Well, during the pandemic, I created a little YouTube video series, which is available for anyone to watch. I called it Pot to Pickle because I realised during the pandemic, loads of people wanted to grow something, didn't have a clue where to start. So it was a series of 12 short videos for someone who'd never planted a seed in their life. How to grow vegetables in pots, because that's how I always had done it, in just pots. And it takes them right through the growing season. So my tip would be, if you've got any outside space, like even the front of your front door, or you have like a, you know, like, I don't know, escape stairs thing outside of your flat, if you've got a tiny if you've got this amount of space to fit a 30 centimetre pot, that gets a good amount of sun, you can grow a tomato plant. Just let that hang in the air.
Very exciting.
And the other
try
thing,
growing tomato plants.
I think tomatoes are one of the easiest, especially cherry tomatoes.
Okay.
I think
I wouldn't say they were easiest.
either.
Only because you need the right conditions to get them started, and you have to start them early. But they're easy if you have got somebody else to do that hard part for
if
you.
you buy it as a
buy it as a plug plant, then you're in business.
Buy it as a plug plant.
This is a very practical tip.
The other thing is the pea shoots. You
Loved
can
your
get a
pea
forest
shoots.
of pea shoots, a forest of those expensive things that restaurants put on their dishes.
Yes.
A forest in 2 weeks, and you just need a windowsill. I also have a video of that.
And you know, you can grow the peas that you can just get in the supermarket, the dried peas.
Yeah,
that you can get in the supermarket.
you know the
They
marrow
don't
fat.
have,
The
you don't have to
bachelor's
have.
marrow fat dried peas that you can get for like 80p.
Very cheap, yeah.
Sprinkle those. Pea
There we
shoots.
go. Inspiration. Actually, I think we should hand over. I'm aware of time. We've got a little bit of time for questions. Have we got a roving mic? We have. Has anyone have this wonderful panel? Any questions? There's a lady at the front down here with. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I shop in North London in TFC, and I have just started about the last 6 months ago running an olive farm in Spain.
Wow.
Which is a 30-acre land with olive trees. So I really appreciate. You can imagine the overwhelm of what it means to do this, but I think what I'm learning and what I'm getting from the talk is we make gardening harder than it is. And we don't look at the spiritual kind of awakening, I guess, that we all get with the community building. And I moved into a village where I don't know anybody. Well, we know now. But it's about the spirituality, the connection. So while the hard work is there, I just want us to remember that there is a deeper, really deep connection with the land wherever we move. So, and thank you so much for today.
Thank you. Have we got any questions? There's a lady at the front.
First of all, thank you very much. It was really interesting. In particular, I found the talking about more urban sort of gardening and community gardens really interesting. So where I grew up in Whitechapel, there are loads of sort of city farms, Hackney, Spitalfields. And I live in North London now, and there are sort of local community gardens, veg boxes. But when I was a teenager, we moved to sort of more suburban town. And ironically, even though we were much closer to nature, there seemed to be far fewer opportunities, especially for young people, to get involved. And now I think increasingly we've seen them, but you sort of have to try a lot harder and also maybe spend more money than we used to have to do in East London. So I was wondering if anyone had any opinions in the more sort of suburban middle ground areas where you don't have masses of space, but you also don't have, you can't sort of pop on your bus to your local sort of city farm, how people, and especially young people, can be encouraged to get involved in things like community gardening and nature more broadly.
Pam. It's all looking at
Oh,
Pam.
well, right, OK. Well, that's an easy one. How long have we got? The bottom line of trying to repurpose public land is it's everywhere. From the smallest village to the busiest borough, there's land paid for by taxation. So if we can find a way of opening up that conversation between the citizens and those people that are elected to steward that land on our behalf. I'm not making a political statement here, it's just a statement of fact, isn't it? then it helps everybody, irrespective of settlement side, to actually become engaged. There is a fantastic, I mean, the vibe in London was driven to a large extent through capital growth and an aspiration around 2012 to really make a difference. And what happened is people were employed to stimulate interest in the community, and that is absolutely incredibly important to do that. Sometimes the familiarity of seeing things growing in a more rural setting doesn't lead those people who want to make decisions on our behalf to think, actually, there is a gap. But I've done a lot of work over the years with many impoverished rural communities who would significantly benefit if that investment was put in there. But for some reason, there's a blind side on it. So I think we just need to keep raising the profile, and if that idea of repurposed public realm is something we can grab hold of because we have a knowledge of our own community, then we should push it really hard, and then maybe we can overcome some of those problems.
Can I ask you, in Todmorden, when you started, so like the police station, did the police station agree, I mean, did you go to the police station and say, can we plant veg in your front?
Eventually we did. Yeah, but we took over a lot of stuff without asking.
Right.
We did some things that were really wrong and really cheesed off the in bloom people because we planted cabbages where there were roses and stuff, and we did stuff like that, and we learned from it.
Right.
When we did the health centre, whatever happens is, if you ask people, we're going to do this, is that all right? They will always say, as long as it doesn't cost us and we don't have to do it, you get on with doing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But with the police, we said, actually, we're going to take over the front of your police station. You'll probably notice this. So, are you all right with it? We did ask permission. And then they said they'd never had a better way of engaging with their community than over the conversations about why the Sam Hill we were growing sweet corn in the middle of the north of England. It was a great conversation breaker. Right. So I actually think most people, once they can see somebody else is having a success, will get out of your way. But we need to create those advocates and champions right on our streets in order for those messages to be heard more clearly, I think.
Fantastic. Have we got time for more questions? And oh, sorry. Yeah.
It's someone actually sighed then. It's such a shame to kind of wind these things up. It feels like there's so much else.
Just got started, Angela.